Welcome to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast where we discuss all things NBA. On today's episode, we talk about teams that are hot, plus tell you why the Phoenix Suns are struggling. That's all coming up and more on today's episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Welcome back to the show. Of course, as always, I'm your wonderful host, Josh Gitman, providing you the latest on everything that is happening in the NBA. And we are 1 month and counting away from the NBA trade deadline. So trade talks, what player wants to go where, are going to heat up very, very fast. But I want to stay away from that as we ramp up towards that because I know we will be talking everything trade deadline in the weeks leading to it. So I want to talk about some teams that have really figured it out in sort of this second quarter of the NBA season. And I think we should give those teams recognition, especially teams that you really didn't think would be on the radar. But before we get to the teams that are hot, the teams that are performing particularly well at this time, I'm going to talk about a team that's not performing well, and that is the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns are struggling mightily right now. They are currently 16-19. They've lost 8 out of their last 10 games, including a loss last night to the Charlotte Hornets, who before their game against the Suns only had 8 wins. They've lost 11 out of 15. They're sitting at 12th in the Western Conference, still 2.5 games out of the playoffs. And the Suns right now are in a very, very rough position, and let me explain why. For any other team, if it was a down year, okay. Yes, there's teams that have championship expectations like the Boston Celtics, like the Thunder, even the Cleveland Cavaliers this year, and many others. It's okay for them to have a down year. You can run it back. The Phoenix Suns, their situation is much different than the rest because the Phoenix Suns are a team that's in the second apron. The Phoenix Suns are a team that has committed all of their financial assets to 3 guys: Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. And the Suns went all in. They traded all their draft capital for a guy like Kevin Durant, for a guy like Bradley Beal, and they're all in with those 3. Surround whoever you want around them because they can only be minimum players, and we will ride with that. And for the past 2 years, it has not been good. Last year was a first-round exit, and this year they're not even in the play-in tournament. They are a game out of there behind San Antonio for the 10th seed, and they're still 3.5 games out of the postseason. I mean, they're nowhere near being comfortable right now, and if they continue this skid, it will be very hard to recover in a Western Conference that is extremely good and extremely difficult to beat any team in that conference this year, to be quite honest. Even the Sacramento Kings, who are sitting ahead of the Suns at 11, who we'll get to a little bit later, have been quite hard to beat as of recently. So the Suns right now, committing all their financial assets to Booker, Beal, and Durant, have really put them in a limited place. And look, Kevin Durant, he's 35, 36? I think he's 36 if I'm not mistaken. I mean, he's getting up there. I mean, you got to go all in if you have Kevin Durant. Devin Booker, 29, 30. Bradley Beal in his 30s. I mean, this is an older team that you're going all in on, and you are in the second apron, so you cannot make any moves. This is it. The Suns cannot make any trades unless they were to trade Bradley Beal, which we will get into in a couple of minutes. And they can't sign decent free agents. I mean, I don't know how they got their hands on Tyus Jones for only $3 million, but other than him, the one exception, they really can't get their hands on good free agents. So they're really relying on those 3 to carry the load at their old age, and with all the injury history in between Kevin Durant, not really Devin Booker, but mostly Durant and Bradley Beal with the injury history. So now we're sitting here. This is the 3rd coach in 3 years for the Phoenix Suns. Monty Williams, of course, getting dismissed by Phoenix. Then Frank Vogel last season. And now they are on to former NBA champion Mike Budenholzer. And the roster and the team and the potential of the team has just really looked the same. I thought they were going to be a sleeper team this year, to be quite honest, because I thought Mike Budenholzer, a championship coach coming in there, making a difference for that team. But at the end of the day, when your roster is the same version, just different coaches for 3 years, Is it really on the coaches or is it really on the construction of the roster? And you've got to put a lot of blame and lot of responsibility on James Jones, the general manager, but more than James Jones, the new owner, Matt Ishbia. The second he made the move to get Kevin Durant, which I don't blame him for making the move to Kevin Durant. That is completely understandable. You know you're going all in. But then you also get Bradley Beal when you could have, for example, let Chris Paul stay another year in Phoenix, let him off the books, and then get another big-time free agent. And you basically gut-wrenched all your draft capital. And Matt Ishbia is willing to pay in the tax. But the problem is you can't, in today's NBA with the new apron rules, because yes, these apron rules have affected everything. They have changed it to the point where you cannot just pay guys whenever you want. You have restrictions now. Now, if Phoenix wanted to get a player, since they're in the second apron, they cannot aggregate contracts in order to get a player. Phoenix cannot use their mid-level exception or taxpayers exception either. Phoenix is in a limited position. They cannot trade draft picks. And if they are in the second apron for a few more years, they will lose their first-round pick. So Phoenix is not in a good position, and you've got to put a lot of responsibility on the owner for going all in. And I love Kevin Durant. I'm going to say this boldly, say this nicely, but boldly at the same time. Kevin Durant, an amazing basketball player. Can he be the number one on a championship team? He absolutely can. But the problem is, how do we know that? I mean, I say that he can, but how do we know that? Because Kevin Durant, when he's won his 2 titles with the Golden State Warriors, he won those titles with a similar person of greatness in Stephen Curry. Kevin Durant hasn't led a team to an NBA championship. And Kevin Durant tried to do that. That's why he left Golden State, went to Brooklyn. Obviously, there was some frustrations at the end with Draymond Green and Golden State, but he left for Brooklyn to lead a team to a championship. He didn't want to just be known as the snake, as the guy who left OKC because he couldn't lead them to a championship, to go to a better team in Golden State so he could win one. So he went to Brooklyn, tried to prove it. Obviously, a major disaster. Kyrie and James Harden, you know the story there. Then you go to Phoenix, you try to lead a championship team here as your best player. And Devin Booker, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, they're not at the same greatness level of Kevin Durant. Steph Curry is. That's why they won the championship, because Kevin Durant had someone as similar caliber to say, okay, you can take the ball. I can sometimes rest over here. It's not going to be all on my shoulders to lead this team. But for every other team he's been on, the Thunder, the Nets, the Suns, it's been on Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant in those 3 organizations has proven he cannot win a title as a number one. And I love Kevin Durant, future Hall of Famer. He's an MVP. He's a 10-time All-Star. The man is sensational. But he cannot be a championship number one. And we're just seeing it right here. And Matt Ishbia took that risk. I mean, I don't blame him for trying to get a guy like Kevin Durant. And you can't really blame Matt Ishbia for saying, okay, we're going to try this with Kevin Durant as our number one guy. But at the same point, you go all in with Bradley Beal, you go all in with Devin Booker, you have no flexibility. Now you're stuck with Kevin Durant. So the responsibility is on you if you're Matt Ishbia. But if you're Kevin Durant and if you're an NBA fan looking at the legacy of Kevin Durant, just look at what he's done as the best player, as the pure number one player. No disputes between him and Curry. Because, yes, Durant did win Finals MVPs in 2017, 2018, but there was disputes between who really was the best player with that Golden State team. There's no disputes with Phoenix. There was no disputes with Brooklyn or Oklahoma City. And Kevin Durant has failed. And I know he's doing great, 27.5 points per game on 36 minutes. But Kevin Durant has just not stepped up when he's needed it the most. When he was the best player, he blew a 3-1 lead. He lost a Game 7 in 2021 when the Nets had their best chance to win a title. And yes, his foot was on the line on that 3-point shot that could have won them the game, but his foot was on the line, so it ended up being a 2-pointer, forced overtime. And if the Nets would have beaten the Bucks in that 2021 series, absolutely do I think that the Nets would have won the championship. But at the end of the day, they didn't. Kevin Durant hasn't led a team to a championship. And the Suns took that gamble saying they thought he could, and obviously he couldn't. And now the Suns are in a tough position, and Kevin Durant may want out. Devin Booker may want out at the end of the year. This is a disaster for the Suns. There's just not really continuity. And when you're looking at the same result with three different coaches, is it really on the coaches? Do you have to look more towards the players? Do you have to look more towards ownership and Matt Ishbia? And yes, speaking of the players, Bradley Beal is someone who hasn't been someone who we thought he would be. We thought Bradley Beal would be a 25-point per game scorer, but he's scoring at his third lowest point total in his career. Not since his fourth year in the league has Bradley Beal averaged less than 18 points per game. And the Phoenix Suns, while they were struggling in the midst of their losing streak, made a bold move before their game against the Philadelphia 76ers, which was one of the games they actually ended up winning in this whole 10-game debacle. They decided to move Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic to the bench while elevating Mason Plumlee, which, okay, understandable, the Mason Plumlee for Nurkic swap, but they decide, Phoenix, to start rookie Ryan Dunn over Bradley Beal. Ryan Dunn, who is a rookie, Bradley Beal is a multiple-time All-Star, and they decide to start a guy who's averaging 7 points per game, and he's a rookie. Rookie out of Virginia. Ryan Dunn is. And he had a good sensational college career. And Phoenix, for their second-round picks that they've had with Oso Ighodaro, Ryan Dunn, Ryan Dunn was actually a late first, but for the draft picks that Phoenix has had, they've actually kind of nailed on them with Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro. So you got to give credit there. But at the end of the day, this is Ryan Dunn. He's a rookie. Bradley Beal's an all-star. Why is Phoenix making this move? Because Phoenix doesn't want Bradley Beal anymore. And we'll get into this at the end of the show as well. But Bradley Beal is not wanted in Phoenix anymore. And can you blame the Suns? I mean, Bradley Beal's making $52 million a year. He's having one of the worst years of his career, shooting the ball poorly from beyond the arc, shooting the ball from the field not efficiently, and having less minutes, not being healthy. Can you really blame the Phoenix Suns for not wanting Bradley Beal? But the problem is you committed to Bradley Beal. He has a huge contract, 3 years left, making $160 million in the next 3 years, and the Phoenix Suns can't do nothing about it because Bradley Beal is a no-trade clause and he can stay. But he could also say, okay, you don't want me, I'll go. I want to go prove myself. He could do that as well. But Bradley Beal's in a situation right now where he controls where he wants to go. Now, of course, is it a coincidence, though, that the Phoenix Suns did this benching right when the Jimmy Butler story came out that he was very interested in going to the Phoenix Suns? Phoenix was his number one option. Matt Ishbia will pay Jimmy Butler the 2 years, $113 million extension. Is it a coincidence that the whole Bradley Beal benching happened at that particular time? Because, yes, the player that you would have to trade, Phoenix, in order to get Jimmy Butler would be Bradley Beal. Whether that's a 2-team trade, but I don't think Miami wants Bradley Beal, or a 3-team trade. Obviously, you're going to want to keep Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. So Bradley Beal's the guy out. But Bradley Beal's a hard person to trade because, as I mentioned, he's making all that money. He has a no-trade clause, and you don't have a lot of draft picks or draft capital to attach to a team to give a guy like Bradley Beal to. Like, you're going to have to attach your last first-round pick if you're Phoenix in 2031. Other than that, they have no draft picks to attach. So how intriguing will it be for a team to have Bradley Beal on their payroll for the next 3 years when he's only averaging 18 points per game? And with his age, it's probably only going to go down as he is 31 years old and starting to get out of his prime. But I was just curious of the timing. And then Mark Barlstein, Bradley Beal's agent, ends up going out and saying, okay, we are not getting rid of this no-trade clause because whenever you try to trade someone, while the trade is happening, there will be a negotiation between Bradley Beal and the team that's trying to trade for him, because even if the team trades for him, there is still an extra negotiation in there on whether that no-trade clause will be retained from one team to another. Phoenix agreed to that, which is why Bradley Beal waived his no-trade clause because he was allowed to keep his no-trade clause in Phoenix. When Miami was interested in getting him at that same time period, Miami said, no, if you're coming here, we don't want that trade clause with you anymore, which is why Bradley Beal preferred the Suns and Miami didn't want him, so he waived it for the Phoenix Suns. So there's that negotiation as well. Obviously, You got to waive the no trade clause first. And obviously, a team's going to have to want that Bradley Beal contract. So it's very tough to trade with the Phoenix Suns. And this is a very tough situation for a team that has 3 all-star caliber players and has championship aspirations. And if I'm Kevin Durant and I'm sitting here around and I really want to ring chase, and yes, I said what I said earlier about him being number 1 on the title team, request a trade. Devin Booker, you didn't want a ring yet? Go request a trade. Devin Booker's a great number 2 on a title contending team. Want out. I mean, this could be a disastrous for Phoenix, and Matt Ishbia is just taking gamble after gamble after gamble, and it is not paying off for him. So Phoenix has an interesting schedule coming up. They have about six winnable games against Atlanta twice, Utah, Charlotte, Washington, and the Pistons, and then they play Cleveland, which they're probably going to lose, but after that, they have Brooklyn and Washington. So this stretch here is going to really tell you, okay, is Phoenix going to figure something out for the temporary while playing below 500 opponents, or is this season a disaster and there are going to be questions about Kevin Durant and Devin Booker's future with the Phoenix Suns in the offseason? So we will see what happens, but very concerning in Phoenix as the West is very tough, and they're sitting at 12th right now, 3 games under the 500. But I want to move on to 2 of the best teams in the NBA, the 2 best teams record-wise, which are the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Cleveland Cavaliers. They actually played last night, and it was a classic. And when I mean classic, I mean absolute dogfight. The 31-4 Cleveland Cavaliers, the 30-5 Oklahoma City Thunder, 2 best teams in the league. And going into this game, the Oklahoma City Thunder were on fire, winning 15 straight games. The Cavaliers have won 10 straight games going into this game. Something was going to have to give, and there were 30 lead changes in the game before ultimately Cleveland won at home 129-122. Again, no Chet Holmgren for the Oklahoma City Thunder right now, as Cleveland gets that done, extends their winning streak to 11 now, and they are 32-4. And actually, Cleveland, to be real, is on pace to get to 72-10, and even potentially get to that Warriors territory of 73-9. I mean, we're almost halfway through the season, and they only have 4 losses. I mean, if the Cavs win their next 5 games, they would be on pace to break the record, the all-time win record. I mean, that would be sensational. 74-8. That is a very hard feat. So Cleveland is making history right now. But the question is here, do I trust the Oklahoma City Thunder or the Cleveland Cavaliers more? And this is a tough one because, yes, Cleveland just beat Oklahoma City. They're both very, very good. Even Oklahoma City losing last night. They beat the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks prior to losing to the Cleveland Cavaliers on the road. So they're both very elite basketball teams, and both teams that I can see making it all the way right now. And yes, Cleveland has done amazing. Oklahoma City has done amazing. But the answer to this question is the Oklahoma City Thunder, despite the loss they had to the Cleveland Cavaliers last night. And let me explain why. Number 1, the Oklahoma City Thunder have something that the Cavaliers do not, and that's an MVP caliber player. Don't get me wrong. Donovan Mitchell, amazing, all-star. Even Evan Mobley, amazing. He should be an all-star this year. But at the end of the day, Oklahoma City has a bad dude in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He was my preseason pick for MVP. And if the season ended today, he would probably be the most valuable player in the NBA right now, averaging 31.5 points per game, 6 assists per game, 2 steals a game, and 6 rebounds a game as well. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has lifted this Oklahoma City Thunder team, especially without Chet Holmgren. And Cleveland, before and postseasons prior, especially when they played the New York Knicks that one year, even when they played the Orlando Magic, a team that they probably should have beat a little bit easier, it was struggles. The Cavaliers have had a lot of struggles in the postseason with this current version of the roster of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. And yes, the 2-guard, 2-big system that hadn't worked in the past with J.B. Bickerstaff is now working to perfection with Kenny Atkinson. And you've got to give Kenny Atkinson a lot of credit. He's probably going to win Coach of the Year if the Cavaliers end up with the best record in the NBA. Obviously, Mark Dangood and him Kenny Atkinson are in a race for that. Probably, as I mentioned, whoever gets the best record will probably win that. But at the end of the day, Cleveland doesn't have a 1A. I've said this before. Love Donovan Mitchell to death. He's not a number one on a title team. Donovan Mitchell has had some good first-round series, especially in the bubble against the Denver Nuggets, despite the loss. He's had a couple of good first-round series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, but is he a number one that I can say definitively, okay, is he going to take me to the NBA Finals? Is he going to be a caliber team like the Boston Celtics who are in their conference? I say no. I don't think Donovan Mitchell has it in him, and sometimes in the playoffs, he hasn't particularly played well, and teams will game plan against that two big man system that the Cleveland Cavaliers have. If you're a team like the Boston Celtics, obviously those are the two teams that are projected to make the conference finals right now, the Celtics and the Cavaliers. If you're the Celtics, who are a 5-out basketball team, and you force both Evan Mobley and Jared Allen to come out to the perimeter, it is going to be trouble for the Cleveland Cavaliers, because you know what's going to happen? That basket attacking the paint will be wide open for guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So that could cause a problem for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if Mobley and Allen help off, the Boston Celtics are going to hit a three-point shot. So I don't trust the Cavaliers when it comes to game planning, especially in the new NBA. Even though the two big man system has worked this regular season, in the playoffs, especially with a team like the Celtics, or especially with a team that can shoot the ball well, which is most championship teams have a tendency to shoot the three-point shot really well, because that's just how the modern NBA is. It's going to be trouble for the Cavaliers extending those two big men out on the perimeter. And again, with the Oklahoma City Thunder, no Chet Holmgren yet. The Oklahoma City Thunder, before last night's game, won 15 straight, all without Chet Holmgren, who's only played 10 games this season, and he's missed the last 26 games. And he's probably going to come back in a couple of weeks. We'll see how his recovery progress progresses. But right now, the fact that Oklahoma City Thunder is doing all they're doing in the tougher conference, despite not having their second best player, shows me a lot. They have a comfortable cushion between the number 2 seed Houston and the number 3 seed Memphis Grizzlies at 6 and 6.5 games respectively. Obviously, the Celtics have a comfortable cushion as well, 5.5 games with the Boston Celtics, but I think we all know in reality that the Eastern Conference is a lot weaker. So the fact that Oklahoma City is doing what they're doing in the tough conference without their second player has shown me a lot. And I think Oklahoma City as well has more depth compared to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, Cleveland, again, those 4 guys are big. Karis LeVert's a nice piece off the bench. Max Strus finally getting back to normal after being out the first 6 weeks of the season. But Oklahoma City Thunder, with their bench of Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Cason Wallace, Alex Caruso, the other Jalen Williams, Kendrick Williams, the Oklahoma City is a very deep team. And I'm not saying Cleveland's bad, but have we seen Ty Jerome really do? Can we really trust on Ty Jerome being that 6th, 7th man off the bench? Can we really trust a guy like Dean Wade to come off the bench? I can't. I trust Oklahoma City Thunder because they have a multitude of options. If one person has a bad game off the bench, put someone else in. Cleveland, you have to rely on Karis LeVert, Ty Jerome, Georges Niang, and Dean Wade. Can you really do that if you're the Cavaliers in the playoff situation? Especially when it's tough to play on the road. The guys that I just listed are unproven in the postseason, unlike the Oklahoma City Thunder bench, where we've seen a guy like Isaiah Joe shoot the lights out last year in the postseason. We've seen Alex Caruso countless times, an NBA champion, play amazing defense in the postseason as well. I mean, the Thunder, to me, especially off the bench, you should be able to trust them more in the postseason compared to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, again, to wrap it all up before we move on, both teams are great. They're both probably going to get the number 1 seed respectively in their conference. But if I had to pick in a 7-game series right now, who am I taking? I'm taking the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we'll get to see part 2 of this matchup as both the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Cleveland Cavaliers are playing once more in Oklahoma City next week. So it's a very exciting thing to see the 2 best teams in the NBA go at it. And trust me, I watched that whole game last night. Amazing. So many lead changes back and forth, all the hype. it was completely an A-plus watch for me, and I cannot wait to watch that again next week. Those two teams have been doing sensational things. There's no shot at Cleveland. I just personally think that the team with the better player, the team who's been playing good in a tougher conference without their second best player, is the team that I can trust more. But moving on, let's talk about a team that very under the radar this year and are over 500, and that is the Detroit Pistons. As you can see, let's talk about them because the Detroit Pistons have been doing things that I personally, even though I predicted the over on the Detroit Pistons, I didn't think they would be over 500. I mean, their over-under win total was 25.5. They're already at 19. They're 19-18, currently sitting at 8th in the Eastern Conference. And remember, just last year, this very same Detroit Pistons team was the worst team in the league. They won 14 games and had an NBA record 28 losses in a row. They won 14 games and lost 28 games in a row last year. And now you're sitting at over 500. 1 year later, what has changed for the Detroit Pistons? Let me tell you. First of all, let's talk about the coach. I thought Monty Williams, personally, good coach. I saw him with Phoenix, developing that roster, getting that 2021 roster to the finals, to me, with Devin Booker and Chris Paul, was pretty impressive and a great job by Monty Williams. He goes to Detroit, doesn't really work out, gets fired. Okay. JB Bickerstaff comes in, changes everything. And I know Cleveland's having success with Kenny Atkinson. I didn't think they should have fired JB Bickerstaff. I think the fact that Bickerstaff got them to the second round, you don't know what would have happened if Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley and others would have been healthy in that series against the Boston Celtics. The fact that you fired him was a little bit perplexing to me, considering the Cavs haven't made it past the second round in over 30 years without LeBron James. So the Pistons swooped JB Bickerstaff in, and he has done an amazing job developing the young guys. With a young team like the Pistons, the key is development, and JB Bickerstaff has developed this team. Cade Cunningham playing like an absolute all-star. Even Jaden Ivey, which he unfortunately, the one bad thing that happened during the Pistons winning streak is that they lost Jaden Ivey to an injury for the season. He was averaging 18 points per game, his best season. He developed the guards to perfection. Just like he figured out how Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland could play together, he figured out how Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey could play together and thrive scoring-wise. And currently, right now, the Pistons, they have won 8 out of their last 9 games, including 6 games in a row. They are currently, if the standings ended today, the season ended today, they would be the 8th seed going on a playing game where they would have 2 opportunities to make the postseason. And it's just been impressive. And yes, the East is on a weak year. Philadelphia, 15-20, haven't really played that well. Chicago, not really that great either. But you look at a team that won 14 games last year and lost 28 straight. You've got to give a lot of credit to JB Bickerstaff. And as I mentioned, Cade Cunningham probably should be an all-star this year, leading this Detroit Pistons team to where they are right now. But I want to talk about what's been the absolute game changer for the Pistons. And that has been the veterans that GM Troy Weaver has brought in for the Pistons. The Pistons have brought in 3 guys. Tobias Harris from the Sixers in free agency, Tim Hardaway Jr. via trade for Quentin Grimes, and Malik Beasley from the Bucks in free agency. And all 3 have improved this roster. All 3 have come in, given that veteran presence, given that veteran leadership for a group of young guys who, to be quite honest, were mightily struggling last year. And they not only have given their veteran leadership and have helped this young team thrive, and off the court, in the locker room, they have contributed as well in big ways. Tobias Harris, 13 points a game. Tim Hardaway Jr., 10 points per game, shooting the lights out from the three-point line. And Malik Beasley, the 3rd leading scorer, without Jaden Ivey, the 2nd leading scorer at 16 points per game. Detroit has immensely improved from the three-point line, adding shooters of Tim Hardaway and Malik Beasley's caliber, and the fact that those guys who struggled in more contending teams like the Mavericks with Hardaway, like the Bucks with Malik Beasley, and now get this opportunity to really reboost and have a chance to bolster their career and put up good numbers on a team that's young and rising. They have been executing that to perfection, and they have been helping this Pistons team out, and to the point where you could make the argument that the Pistons may make the playoffs this year. The whole Miami situation going down, you could really see the Detroit Pistons, if Miami, especially if they fall out because of the whole Butler situation, make the postseason. And who would have thought that after what they went through last year, that was the case? But again, those three guys have really made an impact for them scoring-wise, and it's just been an absolute game changer. And the Pistons, with their development of their young guys, have become a much deeper basketball team. You look at a guy like Amen Thompson, second year, not necessarily scoring more, but on the defensive end, his athleticism he provides, it has been something that has been a game changer for Detroit. The two big men, Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart, they have really bolstered up a Detroit defense that, to be quite honest, was awful last year. The development and the growth from those two big men defensively that I've seen in and out game to game, especially when I was watching their game against the Brooklyn Nets last night where they were winning by 20, blocking shots, preventing big man in the paint, forcing kickouts. Those guys have improved immensely, and those guys have beefed up physically and have really provided their presence in the paint. So it's really been overall a collective effort from a Pistons team that you wouldn't have thought would have this quick of a turnaround. And you look at it now, and their schedule coming up, it's going to get a little bit harder. And now it's time for the test. You play a Golden State team at home. As I'm filming this tonight, obviously we'll know the result by the time this podcast comes out. What are you going to do against the Warriors? You play at New York. That's a pretty big test. Indiana, Phoenix, despite their struggles, are not easy. At Houston, at Atlanta, at Orlando, Cleveland, those are big games as well. The schedule will ramp up for the Detroit Pistons after playing like the injury-riddled Magic, the Hornets, the Blazers, the Nets. But despite that, they've beaten some good teams. I mean, they beat the Suns. They beat the Lakers. Even though Orlando's been injury-riddled, they've had some impressive wins this year. They beat the Minnesota Timberwolves by 14, despite Anthony Edwards having a 50-point game. I mean, it hasn't been like the Pistons are just beating up on all bad teams. I mean, they've had some very impressive wins during the stretch. And you've got to give J.B. Bickerstaff and his staff, no pun intended, a lot of credit for what they have done. And it's a brutal blow that Jaden Ivey is out for the year, but the development of Cade Cunningham, the addition of the veteran guards, and the depth that this team has been an absolute game changer. And I am very curious to see what this Detroit Pistons team has over the next few years. And not over the next few years, but this season, because this season is just the start. Because if you're a young rising team, you just got to get in the playoffs, because the only way you win a championship, the only way you get better is by failing. Failing equals success. Failing leads to success. So if the Pistons, even as an 8th seed, sneaking in there, getting a first-round matchup, whether that's against the Cavaliers or the Boston Celtics, going in a playoff environment, going to Cleveland, going to Boston in a playoff environment, hosting playoff games, experiencing games that mean more. That is important for a team that is developing. That is important for a team that, if, in a few years down the line, if they acquire some other players, have the potential to be in that conversation to win an NBA championship. And of course, I'm not saying the Pistons are contenders right now, but watch out, because the Pistons, not paying a lot of money to a lot of players, they have a decent amount of cap room. And even this year, I expect the Detroit to be buyers at the trade deadline. Like, don't be surprised if the Pistons go out and get someone that can impact winning, because the Pistons are at that position right now where they can trade a guy like Simone Fontecchio. They can trade a Marcus Sasser, because they have that much depth for a guy that's going to help them to win more basketball games. And I've just been impressed with one of the greatest turnarounds from year to year for a team that we looked like in the past few years was absolutely hopeless. And for the first time in Cade Cunningham's career, through 10 games or more in the regular season, he is over 500. I mean, Cade Cunningham, ever since he got drafted in 2020, has been with losing basketball. They've missed the playoffs every year since 2019, and this may be the year finally that Detroit basketball turns things around. So give a lot of credit there. But let's go on to another team that's figured their things out, and that's the Sacramento Kings. Just 1 week ago, in my last episode, we were talking about how the Sacramento Kings fired Mike Brown, and Doug Christie stepped in as the interim head coach. And ever since that point where Mike Brown got fired, the Sacramento Kings have won 5 out of the last 6, including 5 straight. And their last game that they played against my Miami Heat, they won a classic double overtime game where it really looked like they were out of the water. And then all of a sudden, down 17 in the fourth quarter, they came back. They forced overtime. They looked like they were out of it in overtime. They came back, forced double overtime. And then it was a DeMar DeRozan takeover that got the Kings the win. And now Sacramento is in a position where they are almost back to 500 after being 7 games below the 500. And now they are tied for San Antonio for the last play-in spot. They're only 1.5 games from the 8th seed, and they are only now 2.5 games from the 6th seed. So the Kings have gained momentum. And the last 2 games against Golden State, that blowout went in the double overtime one, as I mentioned, against the Miami Heat. They have done it without De'Aaron Fox. Doug Christie and this interim boost has really given a Kings team that looked out of the water some life. And remember, the Sacramento Kings team, they were a 3 seed just 2 seasons ago in 2023, lost to the Warriors in 7 games because of the greatness of Steph Curry. Then they had a down year. They were the 9 seed, but they probably should have made the playoffs. Then this year, they start off really, really slow, lose 6 straight, and they end up firing Mike Brown after that loss to the Detroit Pistons by 1 point. And now, all of a sudden, with Doug Christie, former Sacramento Kings player, has given this team new life. And something that is really different from a guy like Mike Brown, who, yes, I thought was a great coach personally. As I said last week's episode, you can go check it out. I did not think personally that the Kings should have fired him, because I thought the fact that he even got the Kings into the playoffs after their long drought, ending sports' longest drought of missing the postseason, don't you think he should deserve a lot of credit and deserve a lot of flowers? And you just gave him an extension and you fired him. But despite that, Doug Christie, a player, compared to Mike Brown, who wasn't a player, a former player that was with that Kings organization, knows what success is with the Sacramento Kings, and not really being like that kind of guy who's like chill out, like the chill sort of head coach, being that guy like an assistant coach as a head coach, providing a lot of energy, clapping, hyping up teammates. It's hyping up the crowd. He's been that kind of coach, and he's just provided this new juice, this new energy for the Sacramento Kings. And it's not like the Kings have beaten crappy teams. I mean, they've beaten the 76ers. They've beaten the Mavericks. They've beaten the Grizzlies and the Warriors and the Heat. I mean, these haven't been gimme games for the Kings, and they are looking like a team that is a potential threat now to be in that play-in conversation and to make the playoffs. And Sacramento has a good core 3. The problem with the Kings, as I said for a couple of years now, if you've been listening to the podcast, is their depth. You look at their bench of Trey Lyles, Keon Ellis, Kevin Huerter, and Alex Len. That's a problem. I mean, their depth isn't good, and they probably need to make moves at the trade deadline. Obviously, they're a team that's in interest for Brooklyn's Cam Johnson, but we'll see how much they really give up for him, which they'll probably have to give up more depth if they want Cam Johnson in the first place. But I do think one thing that's changed for the Kings has been the addition of Devin Carter the past 3 games. I mean, it's just another player that you can add to their depth. I mean, he was the 13th pick in last year's draft, the son of NBA assistant coach for the Grizzlies, Anthony Carter. And Devin played for Providence, and now he's been playing great on the Kings. I mean, it's not necessarily the scoring, even though he had a good 13-point game against the Warriors. And the game against the Grizzlies and the game against the Heat, it's been the defense for Devin Carter that has really been a difference for a team that is not particularly playing well on the defensive end. The question is, can Fox, Sabonis, and DeRozan keep up the offense? And can a guy like Keegan Murray step up offensively as well, who hasn't really had the greatest of years, to help? I know Malik Monk's doing his thing at 17 points per game as well, but you don't, other than those 4 of Fox, DeRozan, Sabonis, Monk, you don't really have any help offensively. And defensively, this team's not good. They probably do need a guy like Cam Johnson who can be a 3-and-D guy, who can help this team from the 3-point line, because they are not a very good 3-point shooting team, and help them defensively because they're not a very good defensive team. I think Cam Johnson would be a perfect trade. It's just how much more of your depth are you willing to give up? But the Kings, as I mentioned, they've been a lot better with Mike Brown this season. They were 16-13 in clutch games, and now with Doug Christie, they are 3-0 in clutch games, and that's what the NBA is all about. The NBA is about winning those clutch games, winning those close games, and winning the games that come down to the wire. So Sacramento is figuring things out, and we will see how they progress. As coming up, they have, let me check, they have the Boston Celtics, they have the Chicago Bulls, and the Milwaukee Bucks on a 3-game road trip. And if they can go out of that road trip 2-1, we'll see if they can do that. And if they can, who knows, the Sacramento Kings may be back, and they have a test first game when this comes out on Friday night against the Boston Celtics, and we'll see how they play against the defending NBA champions. Let's go on to our final topic, and let's continue on our Jimmy Butler trade discussions. As Jimmy Butler, the report came out the other day that Jimmy Butler does not want to play for the Milwaukee Bucks or Memphis Grizzlies. Chris Haynes reported the news, and this has been a wild, wild journey, to say the least. I have an article on the whole timeline of Jimmy Butler, if you can check it out on allyoucanheat.com. But the whole timeline, the whole situation of this Jimmy Butler drama, it's worse than Minnesota. I mean, we thought Minnesota was one thing, taking the third stringers, beating the first stringers, yelling at practice, causing chaos at practice, bad-mouthing Towns and Wiggins, bad-mouthing Tom Thibodeau. This is worse. The whole situation has just gotten to a point where it's one big head, one big personality versus another big personality. And those two clashing are Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley. And we know both of them want what they want, and they're not going to back down to any fight. So this is going to be a head-to-head fight. And when Jimmy Butler made the request trade, according to ESPN's NBA insider Shams Charania, he was willing to go anywhere but Miami. But now his agent and Butler himself have called other teams and said not to trade for him. And yes, I understand bad teams like, okay, you don't want to go to Washington or Charlotte or Portland. Like, yeah, no offense to those teams, but nobody wants to go there. But a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who are the 3 seed in the Western Conference right now, only half a game back from the 2 seed and are at 24-13. A team like the Milwaukee Bucks, who have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, and a guy in Damian Lillard who you wanted on your team, and now you have the opportunity to be traded to the team that he's on right now, and you don't want to go to either of them. I mean, Butler is making this way more difficult than it needs to be. And at this point, is it really about winning a championship for Jimmy Butler? I mean, Jimmy Butler is an ultimate competitor. We've seen it time and time again with him. I mean, we saw the 56-point game against Milwaukee, one of the best games I've ever watched and one of the best performances that I have ever and probably will in my lifetime witness. We've seen what Jimmy Butler can do in the postseason. But the fact that you don't want to go to a contender, it's really telling other teams, do you really want to win a ring, or are you just in this for the money? Because personally, if you're showing me that you don't want to go to contenders and you're just set on the Phoenix Suns because you know that they're going to pay you, Matt Ishbia is going to give you that 2-year, $113 million contract, I mean, you don't want to win anymore. And then, okay, it's fine. You want to go to Phoenix, sure, but you're not getting traded to Phoenix. Phoenix, it's hard to get you to Phoenix because 3 things need to happen. Because Miami doesn't want Bradley Beal. So it would have to be a 3-team trade. Number 1 is, does the third team want Bradley Beal? Number 2, will Bradley Beal waive his trade costs for the third team? And number 3, will that third team have assets that Miami likes that they will get back? I mean, there's just a lot of complications, a lot of difficulties in a Bradley Beal trade. And yes, I do think with the whole Bradley Beal situation going on, the whole Jimmy Butler thing, yes, it would be a good trade for both sides to move on. But again, why would Miami want a guy, Bradley Beal, who's worse than Jimmy Butler, making more money, and they're stuck with him for more years? At that point, you might as well give Jimmy Butler the 2 years, $113 million extension. But the fact that you don't want to play for the Bucks or the Grizzlies, 2 teams that are contenders in the NBA, that just tells me a lot about where you really want, where your attitude is, what you really want. Because yes, Pat Riley is not going to trade you just to a contender. I mean, you can say you don't want to go to Milwaukee or Memphis, but he may trade you there. He may trade you to Washington, to be quite honest. Like, I don't know. Pat Riley's going to do what Pat Riley wants to do at the end of the day. but you're not a contender with the Phoenix Suns. I mean, people would say, okay, yes, Jimmy Butler going in there, a new ego, hard-nosed, gritty guy, someone who's going to hold others accountable and change the culture of a locker room. Okay, maybe things can change. Maybe they can make a little playoff push. But what are they going to be, a second-round exit at best? I mean, they just don't have enough depth. Butler, you can't trust him to play that many minutes in the regular season because he's not healthy. And in the postseason, I mean, he's going to run out of gas if he's going to play that much in the regular season. And Butler does not like being the third guy on a team. And I don't really see that fit working out with the Phoenix Suns. And even if they did, even if everything went perfect, they're not beating the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're not beating the Denver Nuggets. And I don't even think they're beating the Dallas Mavericks in the playoff series. I think at best, this team with Jimmy Butler minus a Bradley Beal is a second-round team. So I don't really see Phoenix pulling off that trade. The whole Butler situation, though, as I mentioned, absolutely been crazy. At the end of last episode, literally, while I was clicking and recording on last episode, I found out the news that Jimmy Butler was going to be suspended for 7 games. So I'll give you my take on that while we're here with it. I absolutely agree. And to be quite honest, I think Miami, if Butler's not traded before the suspension ends, which is what it's leaning towards, I just send him home. Because right now, Jimmy Butler, the whole situation is a distraction for the Heat team. I mean, in Butler's first game of suspension, they lost to a Utah Jazz team that had 8 wins by 36 points. An 8-win Utah Jazz team that was 14th in the West by 36 points. I mean, that should tell you all you need to know. At home. I mean, this team has gotten affected by Jimmy Butler. And the fact that they won a couple nights ago against the Golden State Warriors, despite the fact that the night before on a back-to-back, they lost that double overtime game to the Kings, as I was bringing up. I'm talking about Doug Christie and the Sacramento Kings turnaround. The fact that they beat the Golden State Warriors shows a lot about that team. Because this team could have packed it up, could have gone to the lottery, captured the flag. But this Miami is a different team, and they have to move on from Jimmy Butler. And bringing him back to the team, bringing him on the bench, seeing him not try on the court anymore, you just can't let that happen if you're the Miami Heat front office. So after the season, I would just say send him home. And to be quite honest, I'm not surprised that Butler's trade market is not as high as it should be because Jimmy Butler is on an expiring contract. Jimmy Butler has asked out on 3 or 4 other teams in the past. Jimmy Butler is 35 years old. How much does Butler have left? I mean, the only reason why a team would be intrigued is because of what Jimmy Butler has done in the playoffs before. And yes, Butler has pushed and elevated the Miami Heat teams further than where they're supposed to go. An 8 seed to the finals is something that we may never see again. Not in a very long time, unless there were injuries. And for the Heat, there were no injuries. Butler just willed that team to the finals. And Butler in 2020 in the bubble, 5 seed, sweep the Indiana Pacers, beat the Milwaukee Bucks in 5, beat the Celtics in 6, before losing to the finals without Bam Adebayo and Dragic and going head-to-head with LeBron James. Butler has maximized this Heat window. The Heat were never a championship team. Butler pushed them to be close to that, making finals appearances, but at the end of the day, they weren't championship good. And yes, Pat Riley probably could have done more to make the team better, but at the end of the day, it's time to turn the page. I mean, yes, both teams really need to move on, whether it ended ugly or whether it didn't. I think both teams really needed to move on because Miami's going in a younger direction. They're relying on younger guys such as Hero, Bam, Khalil Ware, Niko Jovic, Jaime Jaquez Jr. They're going in that direction. A 35-year-old Butler, when you really know you're not going to win a title, that's just not a very good option when you're wasting all that money on him, when you could get more players, look for that next superstar that fits on Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero's timeline, and you can't do that when Jimmy Butler is on contract. So I think the best thing for both teams would be to move on, and if Butler doesn't get traded by the trade deadline, I would just say stay home the rest of the year. And even if the suspension ends before the deadline, I would just say stay home because you cannot have this distraction knowing that Jimmy Butler does not want to play for the Miami Heat again. I mean, it's over. It's over. I mean, the Heat have to make the playoffs this year because if they don't make the playoffs, they will lose both their 2026 and 2028 picks in trades they made prior. If they do make the playoffs, at worst, they will lose their 2025 first, and they will have their 2027 first, as it will be lottery protected. So even if they miss the playoffs in 2027, they will get the pick. So it's important for Miami to make the playoffs this year. And I think they can do it despite Jimmy Butler. And I think Butler being around the team will only make the team worse and will only be more of a distraction for a team that's looking to develop their young core. And that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching the Take Your Shot podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening as we ramp up toward the trade deadline. We're in January. We're in 2025. It's been a great week. We will see what happens in the NBA because you never know what is going to happen. We have rivalry week coming up this week, so that's going to be exciting with some teams going head-to-head like the Celtics, Lakers, Heat, Bucks, Mavericks, Timberwolves, Nuggets, Sixers. It's going to be a very exciting week in the NBA, and we hope you enjoy it because I know I will. And we will see you next week. Thank you very much, guys.